Why did they laugh every time she walked past? Lieutenant Zephr Callaway didn't flinch at the smirks behind the glass of the mess hall window. She only adjusted the strap of her rifle and kept walking, boots hitting the gravel with the same precise rhythm she'd kept since the day she arrived. 23 days on gate duty, 23 days of silence, 23 days of being invisible. At least, invisible enough for them to think she couldn't hear. "Gate girl," they whispered. "A waste of a uniform." They said it lightly, like soldiers do when their pretending words don't cut. But the way their eyes darted toward her and away again said more than their laughter ever could. They didn't understand her stillness. They didn't understand why she stood at the gate like it mattered, while the rest of them chased glory on the ranges, in the field, in the sky. At 600 she reached the guard booth. Her reflection waited in the glass, uniform immaculate, collar exact, hair tight enough to hold under recoil. She gave the night guard a nod, took the tablet logbook, and turned toward the base entrance like she was carved from stone. They wanted her to break, that was the bet. From the mess hall, Captain Merrick Rhodes watched her through the steam of his coffee. "Day 23, he muttered, too loud. "Think she makes it to 30. "She's not going to break," said Major Lennox, barely looking up. "Robots don't break, they just malfunction." They laughed, not because it was funny, because they needed it to be true. Because if it wasn't, if she was something more than the joke they'd made her, then they'd have to see what they'd missed. The morning procession began. ID cards flashed, boots scuffed. Soldiers filed through the checkpoint on autopilot. Some avoided her eyes, others made a point to stare. She met each look the same way, level, unreadable, as if nothing they did could touch her. When Rhodes reached her, he let his ID fall into the mud at her feet. She bent to pick it up, slow, precise, like the motion cost her nothing. "How's the weather down there, Callaway?" he said. His friends chuckled on cue. She handed back his ID, her tone smooth and neutral. "Thank you, Captain Rhodes." "At ease, Lieutenant," he replied, bowing with mock formality. "We wouldn't want you straining yourself with actual military bearing." More laughter. The sound trailed behind them as they walked away. She stood still as the gate itself. Inside her chest, her heart beat steady as a metronome. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. Dust clung to her boots. A supply truck rumbled up, the civilian driver leaning out with a smile. "Thank you, ma'am," he said as she handed back his paperwork, and for a moment, just a moment, the words caught her off guard. When was the last time anyone had said thank you? She gave him a brief nod. The truck rolled on. The silence closed around her again. By mid-afternoon, the routine had set in like always drills on the east field, officers striding from building to building, the hum of generators, the faint thump of rotors in the distance. Life went on, and she stood still. Then came Lieutenant Dressna. Tall, imposing, the kind who didn't need to raise her voice to make others shrink. She stopped at the gate flanked by two junior officers, her smile sharp as a knife. "Callaway must have really pissed off Colonel Blackwood to get stuck here forever," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is where they put the ones who can't handle real field work." The junior officers snickered. One glanced at Zephyr with something like pity, then quickly looked away. "ID, please," Zephyr said evenly. Dressna slapped her card into Zephyr's palm. "Must be fascinating work, truly making use of all that training." "Thank you for your cooperation, Lieutenant Dressna." Dressna leaned close enough that only Zephyr could hear. "You know what we call you in the mess, gate girl. Request a transfer before this becomes your whole career, if it's not already too late." Then she was gone, boots splashing through a puddle, junior officers hurrying to keep pace. Zephyr slid the ID through the scanner, logged it, cleared the entry. Her expression didn't shift, not even when the screen flashed green. By 1800, Sergeant Vale arrived to relieve her. He was one of the few who treated her like an actual human being. "Any excitement today, LT?" Negative, standard procedure followed throughout. He nodded, see you tomorrow. She walked back through the base with the same measured pace she'd walked out. Eyes followed her, curious, dismissive, some sharp, some uneasy, like they sensed something about her they couldn't name. Her quarters were as stripped down as a supply closet, bed made to hospital corners, uniforms aligned by regulation, not a single object out of place. On her nightstand lay the only personal item in sight, a photo face down, edges worn soft by handling. She sat at her desk and opened a leather-bound journal. The symbols she wrote weren't English. They weren't any language anyone on this base would recognize. Every line was precise, exact, the marks of someone who didn't waste ink or time. Her secure phone buzzed. No caller ID, just a black screen. She answered immediately, Callaway. Status report, said a voice like cold steel. Nothing to report, sir. Position maintained. Timeline assessment continuing as scheduled. 87% complete. Acknowledged, maintain protocol. Yes, sir. The call ended. She set the phone down, adjusted her sleeve just enough for a glimpse of the tattoo on her wrist, geometric lines woven into a symbol no one at Arcturus had ever seen. She returned to her journal, writing until the page was full. When she was done, she locked it in a small case with both a key and her fingerprint. Then finally she reached for the face-down photo, turned it over. A team stood in front of a helicopter, not standard gear, faces half hidden by shadow and equipment, arms thrown around each other's shoulders. And her, smiling unarmored human. A version of herself no one here had ever seen. She stared at it for 30 seconds, then set it face down again. The next morning, rain turned the dirt to mud. She walked through it as if she didn't notice. Rhodes and his friends cut across her path. Morning gate girl, one called. Weather suits you, gray and dismal. Think she actually sleeps standing up, another asked. Like a horse, probably powers down for the night, said a third. Their laughter faded behind her. She took her position at the gate. She didn't blink as the rain soaked through her uniform, didn't twitch when the cold bit her fingers. Her focus didn't waver, not even when she caught sight of Colonel Blackwood striding from the administration building surrounded by senior staff. Their faces were tight, urgent. Something had changed. Her phone buzzed, the black screen again. Proceed with final assessment phase, the voice said. Timetable accelerated. Understood, she replied. Reason for acceleration. Command arriving within 48 hours. Prepare accordingly. The line went dead. She slipped the phone into her pocket. From the outside, nothing changed. But if anyone had been watching closely, they would have seen it, the subtle shift in her posture, like a predator catching the scent of something new on the wind. By noon, the rain stopped. The gate was surrounded by puddles. Soldiers tracked mud through the checkpoint without glancing at her. Inside, the communications center had become a hive of movement. Radios crackled. Runners carried sealed folders from building to building. During her break, she found a spot behind the supply warehouse, pulled out her secure tablet, reviewed the base schematic marking blind spots, guard rotation patterns, access point vulnerabilities, every note surgical, precise. A shadow moved. She snapped the tablet closed. Something interesting, Lieutenant. Senior Communications Officer Reeves stood a few meters away, arms folded. His smile was mild. His eyes weren't. Just reviewing regulations, sir, she said. Funny thing, he replied. Your file came up for clearance verification this morning. There was an anomaly. Your record seems to have two different versions. A clerical error, I'm sure. Probably, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Though I noticed your previous posting was redacted, completely, not just classified, gone. The military works in mysterious ways, sir. "That it does, Lieutenant, that it does." He stepped aside, let her pass. She walked back to the gate without looking over her shoulder, but she knew he was still watching. Why did they laugh every time she walked past? Lieutenant Zephr Callaway didn't flinch at the smirks behind the mess hall glass. She only adjusted the strap of her rifle and kept walking, boots hitting the gravel with the same precise rhythm she'd kept since the day she arrived. 23 days on gate duty, 23 days of silence, 23 days of being invisible. At least, invisible enough for them to think she couldn't hear. "Gate girl," they whispered. "A waste of a uniform." They said it lightly, like soldiers do when their pretending words don't cut. But the way their eyes darted toward her and away again said more than their laughter ever could. They didn't understand her stillness. They didn't understand why she stood at the gate like it mattered, while the rest of them chased glory on the ranges, in the field, in the sky. At 600 she reached the guard booth. Her reflection waited in the glass, uniform immaculate, collar exact, hair tight enough to hold under recoil. She gave the night guard a nod, took the tablet logbook, and turned toward the base entrance like she was carved from stone. They wanted her to break, that was the bet. From the mess hall, Captain Merrick Rhodes watched her through the steam of his coffee. "Day 23, he muttered, too loud. "Think she makes it to 30. "She's not going to break," said Major Lennox, barely looking up. "Robots don't break, they just malfunction." They laughed, not because it was funny, because they needed it to be true. Because if it wasn't, if she was something more than the joke they'd made her, then they'd have to see what they'd missed. The morning procession began. ID cards flashed, boots scuffed. Soldiers filed through the checkpoint on autopilot. Some avoided her eyes, others made a point to stare. She met each look the same way, level, unreadable, as if nothing they did could touch her. When Rhodes reached her, he let his ID fall into the mud at her feet. She bent to pick it up, slow, precise, like the motion cost her nothing. "How's the weather down there, Callaway?" he said. His friends chuckled on cue. She handed back his ID, her tone smooth and neutral. "Thank you, Captain Rhodes." "At ease, Lieutenant," he replied, bowing with mock formality. "We wouldn't want you straining yourself with actual military bearing." More laughter. The sound trailed behind them as they walked away. She stood still as the gate itself. Inside her chest, her heart beat steady as a metronome. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. Dust clung to her boots. A supply truck rumbled up, the civilian driver leaning out with a smile. "Thank you, ma'am," he said as she handed back his paperwork, and for a moment, just a moment, the words caught her off guard. When was the last time anyone had said thank you? She gave him a brief nod. The truck rolled on. The silence closed around her again. By mid-afternoon, the routine had set in, like always, drills on the east field, officers striding from building to building, the hum of generators, the faint thump of rotors in the distance. Life went on, and she stood still. Then came Lieutenant Dressna. Tall, imposing, the kind who didn't need to raise her voice to make others shrink. She stopped at the gate flanked by two junior officers, her smile sharp as a knife. "Callaway must have really pissed off Colonel Blackwood to get stuck here forever," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is where they put the ones who can't handle real field work." The junior officers snickered. One glanced at Zephyr with something like pity, then quickly looked away. "ID, please," Zephyr said evenly. Dressna slapped her card into Zephyr's palm. "Must be fascinating work, truly making use of all that training." "Thank you for your cooperation, Lieutenant Dressna." Dressna leaned close enough that only Zephyr could hear. "You know what we call you in the mess, gate girl. Request a transfer before this becomes your whole career, if it's not already too late." Then she was gone, boots splashing through a puddle, junior officers hurrying to keep pace. Zephyr slid the ID through the scanner, logged it, cleared the entry. Her expression didn't shift, not even when the screen flashed green. By 1800, Sergeant Vale arrived to relieve her. He was one of the few who treated her like an actual human being. Any excitement today, LT? Negative. Standard procedure followed throughout. He nodded. See you tomorrow. She walked back through the base with the same measured pace she'd walked out. Eyes followed her, curious, dismissive, some sharp, some uneasy, like they sensed something about her they couldn't name. Her quarters were as stripped down as a supply closet, bed made to hospital corners, uniforms aligned by regulation, not a single object out of place. On her nightstand lay the only personal item in sight, a photo face down, edges worn soft by handling. She sat at her desk and opened a leather-bound journal. The symbols she wrote weren't English. They weren't any language anyone on this base would recognize. Every line was precise, exact, the marks of someone who didn't waste ink or time. Her secure phone buzzed. No caller ID, just a black screen. She answered immediately. Callaway. Status report, said a voice like cold steel. Nothing to report, sir. Position maintained. Timeline assessment continuing as scheduled. 87% complete. Acknowledged. Maintain protocol. Yes, sir. The call ended. She set the phone down, adjusted her sleeve just enough for a glimpse of the tattoo on her wrist, geometric lines woven into a symbol no one at Arcturus had ever seen. She returned to her journal, writing until the page was full. When she was done, she locked it in a small case with both a key and her fingerprint. Then finally she reached for the face-down photo, turned it over. A team stood in front of a helicopter, not standard gear, faces half hidden by shadow and equipment, arms thrown around each other's shoulders. And her, smiling unarmored human. A version of herself no one here had ever seen. She stared at it for 30 seconds, then set it face down again. The next morning, rain turned the dirt to mud. She walked through it as if she didn't notice. Rhodes and his friends cut across her path. Morning gate girl, one called. Weather suits you, gray and dismal. Think she actually sleeps standing up, another asked. Like a horse, probably powers down for the night, said a third. Their laughter faded behind her. She took her position at the gate. She didn't blink as the rain soaked through her uniform, didn't twitch when the cold bit her fingers. Her focus didn't waver, not even when she caught sight of Colonel Blackwood striding from the administration building surrounded by senior staff. Their faces were tight, urgent. Something had changed. Her phone buzzed, the black screen again. Proceed with final assessment phase, the voice said. Timetable accelerated. Understood, she replied. Reason for acceleration. Command arriving within 48 hours. Prepare accordingly. The line went dead. She slipped the phone into her pocket. From the outside, nothing changed. But if anyone had been watching closely, they would have seen it, the subtle shift in her posture, like a predator catching the scent of something new on the wind. By noon, the rain stopped. The gate was surrounded by puddles. Soldiers tracked mud through the checkpoint without glancing at her. Inside, the communications center had become a hive of movement. Radios crackled. Runners carried sealed folders from building to building. During her break, she found a spot behind the supply warehouse, pulled out her secure tablet, reviewed the base schematic marking blind spots, guard rotation patterns, access point vulnerabilities, every note surgical, precise. A shadow moved. She snapped the tablet closed. Something interesting, Lieutenant. Senior Communications Officer Reeves stood a few meters away, arms folded. His smile was mild. His eyes weren't. Just reviewing regulations, sir, she said. Funny thing, he replied. Your file came up for clearance verification this morning. There was an anomaly. Your record seems to have two different versions. A clerical error, I'm sure. Probably, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Though I noticed your previous posting was redacted completely, not just classified, gone. The military works in mysterious ways, sir. That it does, Lieutenant, that it does. He stepped aside, let her pass. She walked back to the gate without looking over her shoulder, but she knew he was still watching. Her shift dragged toward evening. The sky bled orange over the training fields. The same soldiers who mocked her now jogged past her post dripping sweat, laughing loudly, like they needed to remind themselves they were real soldiers, that they were not her. She stayed rooted, silent, eyes scanning every vehicle, every ID, every flicker of movement along the fence line. Not one of them noticed how often her gaze lingered on the shadows. Not one of them realized she wasn't just looking out for what might come in. She was measuring what it would take to get back out. How long could someone stand perfectly still before they vanished? By the end of the week, even the new Rangers had learned the base's unspoken rule: laugh at the woman on gate duty. It was how you belonged, how you proved you weren't her. Zephyr heard it all, though they thought she didn't. A muttered robot, a theatrical salute, a dramatic yawn as they handed over their IDs. It had become part of the ritual, like tapping a badge or adjusting a helmet strap. They needed her to be the joke. They had no idea what it was costing her not to be. The heat came down like a hammer that day. The guard booth turned into a steel oven. Sweat pooled under body armor, dust clung to skin, and still she stood uniform immaculate, eyes sharp, face unreadable. How does she do that? One of the new Rangers whispered, wiping his brow. Rumor is she spent 3 years in Afghanistan, another said. This heat's nothing to her. That's not what I heard, Lieutenant Dresna cut in, strolling up behind them like a cat joining a flock of pigeons. Word is she cracked during a training op. Couldn't handle pressure. They stuck her here because she can't be trusted with real responsibility. The Rangers nodded. They didn't question it. Why would they? Dresna was tall, confident, sure of her place in the hierarchy. Zephyr was the one standing in the dirt like a forgotten statue. Reputation moved faster than facts on a base. By afternoon, half the newcomers were smirking at her like they'd known her failure for years. That was when Dresna drove the Humvee through the puddle. The engine roared. The wave of muddy water slammed against Zephyr's boots, spattering her from chest to knees. Dresna leaned out the window, grinning. At least now you match the dirt you stand in, she called as her passengers howled with laughter. Mud slid down Zephyr's immaculate uniform. Her posture never shifted, not an inch. But for a single heartbeat, her jaw clenched. Later, during her break, she stripped off the uniform jacket and methodically scrubbed the stains in the restroom sink. She didn't glance at the mirror until the fabric was spotless again. When she finally lifted her head, her reflection stared back blank and still, except for her eyes. Not hurt, not angry, something colder. Something like calculation. She took a small digital camera from her pocket and photographed the mud stains before drying the fabric. Evidence, not outrage. She smoothed the clean jacket over her arm and walked out like nothing had happened. But when she returned to her post, the air felt different. 3 security personnel were double-checking the perimeter fence, something no one had bothered doing in weeks. Communications staff moved faster, eyes darting like birds. The atmosphere had shifted in some way no one could name yet. Zephyr didn't smile, but inside something quiet and sharp clicked into place. Mid-afternoon, Senior Communications Officer Reeves passed through the checkpoint again. He stopped mid-step, eyes flicking from his tablet to her face. "That's odd," he muttered. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked, voice perfectly neutral. He hesitated, then closed the screen. "No, nothing at all, Lieutenant." He walked on, glanced back once, his brow furrowed. She logged the interaction in her mental file. Another complication, possibly significant. Minutes later, her secure phone buzzed. 2 words. Maintain position. She slipped it away without a flicker of reaction. The evening brought a sudden announcement over the PA. Base-wide training exercise. All personnel except essential security to participate. Which meant everyone but her. From the gate, she watched squads form up across the yard. She tracked their formations, spacing, timing, how they cleared corners and moved through the mock compound. Her gaze wasn't judgmental, just clinical. Observing flaws no one else even saw. Captain Rodas passed with his squad, gear immaculate, swagger sharp. He slowed as they neared the checkpoint. "Try not to fall asleep while we do the real work, gate girl," he said. "Good luck with your exercise, Captain," she replied even. "Luck has nothing to do with it. Skill does," he shot back. "Something you might want to acquire someday." She watched them move toward the training field. Their formation was sloppy. Intervals too tight, flanks exposed. She said nothing. By dusk, blank gunfire echoed across the base. Shouted commands, dust and adrenaline. And still she stood at her post, silent. When the exercise ended, the others returned laughing, ribbing each other, already rewriting their mistakes into victories. She remained, the unmoving fulcrum around which the chaos spun. That night, she unlocked the hidden compartment under her mattress, retrieved her secure tablet. The glow lit her face in pale blue as she reviewed the day's satellite imagery. She overlaid the images with the notes she'd made from her post: guard rotations, blind spots, lapses in procedure, timing vulnerabilities. One by one, the picture sharpened. Not a base, a puzzle. She was almost done solving it. Assessment status, 87% complete, read the prompt. She typed a brief confirmation. Then the base alarm blared. Her tablet went dark in an instant, self-wiping. She snapped to her feet, already reaching for her uniform jacket as the announcement cut through the night. "Attention all personnel. Special Operations Command arriving. Full protocol." Outside her window, the base erupted. Officers shouting orders. Crews frantically polishing gear. Boots pounding on gravel. This was not scheduled. Which meant it wasn't random. She secured the tablet, scanned her quarters, ensuring not a single trace of her real work was visible. Then she stood still for 5 slow breaths, resetting, emptying. When she stepped out, the air itself seemed taut. Even Colonel Blackwood was out, stalking the administration building like a hawk inspecting its nest. "Callaway." Captain Rodas barreled toward her, collar straightened, boots gleaming. "You're still on gate duty. Make sure everything is by the book. SOCOM doesn't tolerate sloppiness." "Yes, sir." "And for God's sake, try to look like a proper soldier for once," he muttered, tugging at his own sleeves as he passed. She returned to the gate as though nothing had changed. But everything had. 3 weeks of standing like a shadow. 3 weeks of letting them see only what they wanted to see. And now the board was shifting. Twilight slid over the base like smoke. From her post, she watched it change them. The same men who had mocked her stood straighter now, voices lowered, boots struck the gravel with sharper rhythm. They sensed what was coming. They just didn't know it was coming for them. From the east road, 3 black SUVs appeared, gliding toward the main gate. The base fell silent. Engines rumbled to a halt. The rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Commander Thorne Westlake stepped out. Even from here, his presence bent the air. Weathered face marked by battles that lived only in whispers, eyes cold and clear, scanning the perimeter with the instinct of a man who had learned never to trust stillness. His team flowed out behind him, silent, fluid, deadly in their economy of movement. Not a sound wasted, not a glance out of place. They weren't like the others. They weren't trying to look dangerous, they simply were. Colonel Blackwood rushed forward, hand outstretched. "Commander Westlake, this is an unexpected honor. Had we known you were coming." "This isn't a social call, Colonel," Westlake said flatly. "Intelligence flagged possible security concerns. We're conducting surprise inspections." Of course," Blackwood gestured toward the admin building. "We maintain the highest standards at Arcturus. I'd be happy to give you a personal." Westlake wasn't looking at him anymore. His eyes had found the gate. They had found her. For a moment he just stared. Something like recognition flickered behind his gaze. "Commander," Blackwood prompted. "In a moment, Colonel." Westlake began walking, past the lined-up officers, past Rhodes, who straightened instinctively, preparing to introduce himself. Westlake moved past him like he wasn't there. His team adjusted subtly, forming an orbit around him without a word. The base personnel watched, confusion whispering through their ranks. Why would an elite operator approach the gate girl? Zephyr stood at perfect attention, posture razor-sharp, expression unreadable. But inside, the air in her lungs felt heavier, like the moment just before lightning strikes. Westlake stopped in front of her, close enough that only she could hear. "I was told I'd find you here," he said quietly, "though I admit I had my doubts." "Protocol dictated this approach, sir," she replied just as soft. "And your assessment?" "Nearly complete. The arrival of your team provides the final variable." He nodded once faintly, then stepped back, his voice carrying for all to hear. "Lieutenant, I'll need to see your security logs and access protocols." "Yes, sir. They're available at your convenience." Blackwood blinked. "Commander, perhaps you'd prefer to start with our command center. Lieutenant Callaway is merely our—" "I'm well aware of who Lieutenant Callaway is," Westlake said, cutting him off. His tone was mild, steel under silk. "Her position is precisely why I'm starting here." Confusion rippled outward. Rhodes opened his mouth, closed it. No one noticed the way her fingers tightened imperceptibly on the logbook. No one but Westlake. He caught her gaze. And for the first time in 3 weeks, her shoulders squared. Why did the air feel like it might break? Silence settled over the base yard as Commander Westlake stood in front of the woman they had called Gate Girl for 3 long weeks. Even the hum of generators seemed to hush. Soldiers lined the periphery, eyes flicking between their commander and the forgotten lieutenant who had been standing in the dirt since the day she arrived. Zephyr didn't move, didn't blink. Her heart was steady, too steady. Westlake's gaze cut through her like an X-ray, precise and cold and knowing. Then very slowly, he straightened to his full height. And he saluted her. Not a casual acknowledgement, not the perfunctory flick of fingers that passed between ranks like currency. A perfect, formal regulation salute, the kind reserved for superior officers or moments of profound respect. Gasps cracked the stillness. Confusion rippled through the ranks like shrapnel. Zephyr returned the salute with the same crisp precision. "Honor to see you again, Wraith," Westlake said. The nickname hit like a detonation. Wraith. The words seemed to hang in the air, alien and impossible. None of them had heard it before, but the weight in his voice when he said it made the skin prickle at the backs of their necks. Captain Rhodes took a half-step forward, his voice strained and uncertain. "Commander, this is Lieutenant Callaway, our gate security." Westlake didn't even glance at him. "I know exactly who she is." His tone cut like steel, quiet, absolute. Master Chief Callaway, Westlake's second, moved closer almost unconsciously, his eyes tracking Rhodes's face. "You don't know who she is," he murmured, just loud enough for nearby personnel to hear. "She's Lieutenant Callaway," Rhodes said, faltering. "Gate duty, that's—" "That's Go 6, Callaway interrupted softly. "The only survivor of Operation Nightshade." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Operation Nightshade, a name spoken like a ghost story in the SOF community, a mission most believed had ended in total annihilation. She extracted an entire team under heavy fire after her co was killed, Callaway went on. 3 congressional commendations, all classified. Rhodes's face drained of color. Dresna shouldered forward, disbelief tightening her jaw. That's impossible. She's just a washout assigned to. And you are Lieutenant Dresna, Callaway said flatly. His eyes didn't blink. Perhaps you should consider that your assessment abilities need significant improvement. The words dropped like a hammer. Dresna went silent. Colonel Blackwood stepped in, trying to wrestle control of the moment back. Commander Westlake, there seems to be some confusion. Lieutenant Callaway was assigned here 3 weeks ago as a standard security. Was she? Westlake asked mildly, one brow lifting. And it never occurred to you to question why an officer with her qualifications would be posted at a gate. Blackwood blinked, the edges of realization beginning to creep in. Under whose authority? He asked. Mine, said a new voice behind them. Every head turned. The third SUV's door stood open. A silver-haired figure stepped out with a calm that seemed to still the air around him. General Harlow. Blackwood snapped to attention so fast his collar bit his neck. General, we had no idea you would be joining Commander Westlake. That, Harlow said dryly, was rather the point. He walked toward Zephyr. His presence was quieter than Westlake, but heavier, like gravity, like inevitability. At ease, Lieutenant, he said. It was the first time anyone at Arcturus had seen her relax. Just slightly, shoulders easing, hands loosening at her sides. Yes, sir, she said, voice low. Harlow turned to the gathered officers. His tone sharpened like a blade on stone. 3 weeks ago, intelligence suggested that forward operating base Arcturus might have critical security vulnerabilities. Rather than conduct a standard inspection, which would only show us what you wanted us to see, we decided on a different approach. He gestured to Zephyr. Lieutenant Callaway was inserted undercover as a low-level security officer to observe your operations from inside, unseen, unassisted, unacknowledged. The words rolled through the assembled ranks like a cold wind. Murmurs sparked, eyes darting, faces shifting from disbelief to shame to something rawer, fear. Lieutenant Callaway, Harlow continued, is one of our most decorated special operations officers. Her assignment was to document every security breach, every procedural failure, every vulnerability that could be exploited by hostile forces. Captain Rhodes stepped forward, voice brittle. Sir, with all due respect, if this was an official evaluation, should you have been informed? Harlow's eyes cut to him like a searchlight. Tell me, Captain, does the enemy announce themselves before exploiting your weaknesses? Do they file proper paperwork before infiltrating your perimeter? Rhodes's mouth shut, his gaze dropped to the dirt. Harlow turned to Zephyr. Your assessment, Lieutenant. Zephyr reached into her jacket and withdrew a secure tablet. When she spoke, her voice was different, the careful neutrality gone, replaced with clipped, lethal precision. Forward operating base Arcturus has 17 critical security vulnerabilities, she said, 9 of which could be exploited with minimal resources. The northwest perimeter fence has a blind spot between camera positions 3 and 4, unaddressed for 2 weeks. Guard rotations are predictable and unchanged regardless of threat level. Communication protocols are routinely bypassed for convenience. She went on, calm, methodical, unflinching. Each flaw another blade laid on the table. The base personnel, she concluded, have demonstrated a consistent tendency to underestimate or dismiss potential threats that do not conform to their expectations. This cognitive vulnerability may be the most dangerous of all. Silence held, brittle and absolute. Harlow nodded, took the tablet from her hands. Thank you, Lieutenant, exemplary work. He turned to Colonel Blackwood. Your base has failed this evaluation spectacularly, Colonel. Under normal circumstances, This would result in immediate command restructuring. Blackwood's face went white. "General, I assure you." "However," Harlow cut in, "Lieutenant Callaway has recommended that you be given the opportunity to address these issues under supervision. She believes the fundamental structure is sound despite the numerous failures in execution." Relief washed over Blackwood's face so visibly it almost hurt to watch. "Thank you, General and Lieutenant. I give you my word that every vulnerability will be addressed immediately." "See that it is," Harlow said curtly. "Commander Westlake's team will remain here for 1 week to oversee implementation." Then to Zephr, "Lieutenant, you are relieved of your cover assignment. Report to Commander Westlake for reintegration with your unit." "Yes, sir." Harlow turned to leave, but Rodis's voice stopped him. "Sir, I would like to formally apologize to Lieutenant Callaway for any disrespect shown during her assignment." The general paused, looked to Zephr. She met Rodis's eyes, steady, measured. "No apology necessary, Captain," she said. "Your behavior was precisely what my mission required. Had you treated me with respect, I might not have discovered the full extent of this base's vulnerabilities." The words hit harder than anger ever could. Rodis flinched like he'd been struck. Westlake's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like recognition. Within minutes, the base yard emptied. Commanders and captains scattering like shaken ants. Orders crackled through radios. Harried voices echoed off concrete walls. Only Westlake stayed by the gate as the dust settled around them. He watched her quietly, head tilted slightly. 3 weeks without breaking cover," he said. "Most would have cracked by day 3. "The mission required authenticity," she replied. "Breaking cover would have compromised results." "Still," he said softly, "it can't have been pleasant." "Pleasant wasn't the objective, sir." Something flickered in her eyes, not pride. Something quieter, sadder, like remembering an old wound that had closed but never stopped aching. Westlake caught it, said nothing. An hour later, the briefing room filled like a storm surge. Every senior officer on base, Commander Westlake and his entire team, Colonel Blackwood, shoulders locked, jaw tight, and at the end of the table, Zephr Callaway sitting straight-backed, silent, eyes forward. "Let me be absolutely clear," Blackwood began, voice sharp as shattered glass. "What happened here represents a complete failure of professional military conduct. Lieutenant Callaway was performing a vital security function. Instead of supporting that mission, she was subjected to unprofessional behavior that actively undermined base security." Chairs creaked, eyes dropped. "In this room, classified files are opened," Blackwood went on. "Lieutenant Callaway was not assigned to gate duty as punishment. She was conducting a comprehensive security audit of this installation, authorized at the highest level." Zephr stood smoothly, parade rest, her voice quiet but cutting. "The enemy does not announce themselves with rank and decoration," she said. "Vulnerabilities often exist where complacency and arrogance intersect." Westlake inclined his head slightly. "Her findings will strengthen protocols across all forward bases," he said. "Her work here has likely saved lives we will never know needed saving." Blackwood nodded. "Effective immediately, all security protocols will be reviewed and updated. Commander Westlake's team will conduct retraining on proper procedure, and I expect every officer to demonstrate the professionalism that was sorely lacking during Lieutenant Callaway's assignment." His eyes found Rodis, then Dresna, his voice sharpened. "Some of you may face disciplinary action. Consider yourselves fortunate that Lieutenant Callaway has advocated for training rather than dismissal." Silence heavy, ashamed. Zephr said nothing. They all looked at her differently now, not with contempt, not even with fear, with the uneasy awe reserved for things they had mocked before realizing those things could destroy them. Why did it feel quieter, even when the bass was louder than ever? 2 days had passed since the reveal, and forward operating base Arcturus was almost unrecognizable. The same gravel paths, the same chain-link fences, the same droning generators and distant rotor thumps. But the tone had shifted. The laughter had died. Where there had been careless swagger, there was clipped formality now. Soldiers moved faster. Voices stayed low. Salutes were sharper, boots cleaner, protocols suddenly gospel. It wasn't respect, not yet. It was fear of what she had seen in them, and what she might still see. Zephyr stood at the gate as always, but the dynamics had inverted. They avoided her eyes now. The same captains who once made sport of taunting her now walked a half-step straighter when they passed, spines tightening like pulled wire. They couldn't seem to stop glancing at her, like children eyeing the deep end of a pool. And she let them. Her face was unreadable as ever. But inside, the silence felt heavier. This was the part no one prepared you for, when the mission ended, and what they saw in you stayed burned into their eyes. When you couldn't go back to being just a person. She scanned another ID, logged another name, cleared another vehicle. Her hands were steady. But beneath the mechanical precision of her movements, her mind replayed fragments of old echoes she couldn't silence. The gunfire ripping through the jungle canopy, the blood slick on her hands, the radio screaming nightshade compromised before the static swallowed it. 12 in, 1 out. And still breathing. The cost of survival never stopped collecting interest. It just got quieter about it. Mid-morning, Captain Rhodes appeared at the edge of her post. He wasn't flanked by his usual entourage. No smirk, no swagger, just a man standing too stiffly in boots that suddenly seemed too loud on gravel. "Lieutenant," he said. "Captain," she acknowledged. "I wanted to speak with you, privately." She finished scanning the ID in her hand, handed it back to the corporal waiting nervously, then stepped aside just enough to give him space without surrendering her post. Rhodes cleared his throat, eyes fixed somewhere over her shoulder. "My behavior was unprofessional and unworthy of my rank. I owe you an apology." Her eyes stayed on his, steady as stone. "Your behavior was consistent with the base culture, Captain. That was the real problem my mission identified." "That doesn't excuse it." "No," she said softly. "It doesn't, but it does provide context." He nodded, something loosening in his posture, not relief exactly, more like exhaustion. "For what it's worth," he said, voice low, "I'm genuinely sorry." She let the silence stretch, then gave the smallest nod. "Noted, Captain, apology accepted." He exhaled, a quiet, shaky sound like air leaving a deflating shell. Then he left, boots crunching on gravel. For the first time, he didn't look back. Inside the administration building, the air buzzed with frantic purpose. Westlake's operators moved like wolves through sheep, silent, fluid, eyes everywhere. They inspected locks, audited armories, tore apart protocols like mechanics stripping down engines. And everywhere they went, officers stepped aside. Like the air bent around them. Zephyr walked through their orbit, untouched by the hum. She carried her secure tablet tucked to her chest, briefing Westlake in clipped tones on the vulnerabilities she had flagged for immediate remediation. He listened without interrupting, expression unreadable, but his eyes softened imperceptibly as they scanned her face, like a man reacquainting himself with something he thought he'd lost. "The team has missed you," he said quietly as they left the comm center. She didn't look at him. Nightshade required adjustments for all of us. His jaw tightened, that it did. They walked in silence for a few paces. "Will you be rejoining the unit after this?" he asked. "Those orders have not been confirmed," she said, but something faint, like a shadow of a smile, touched her voice. "Yet." Westlake caught it, said nothing more. That night the base was unnervingly still. No drunken laughter spilling from the rec hall. No late-night poker slaps or impromptu guitar riffs echoing down the barracks corridors. Even the air smelled scrubbed, as if the place itself had been trying to wash away its own shame. Zephyr sat alone at her desk. The lamp cast a sharp circle of light across her journal. She wrote in her cipher, the same meticulous, tiny script that no one but her could read. Each symbol precise, each page a quiet war against forgetting. But tonight her hand stilled halfway down the page. Her eyes slid to the face-stone photograph. She turned it over. The team stared back at her from that frozen moment in time, the same team whose faces had haunted her every silence. Arms around each other, dirt on their faces, exhaustion in their smiles. 11 ghosts. One survivor. Her throat tightened. Not from grief anymore, grief had burned itself hollow years ago. This was something else, something she never named out loud. The ache of being remembered only by the dead. She set the photo down gently, then locked her journal away and sat in the dark until her heartbeat leveled again. Morning brought new drills. Westlake's team ran the officers through security protocol rewrites like a forge hammer reshaping brittle metal. Checkpoints, response times, breach drills. Zephyr stood to the side, silent as always, watching them move through the gauntlet she had built out of their failures. The men she had once called brothers glanced at her in passing, subtle nods slipping through their steel discipline. Kavech, her old second, paused on his way past, still cold as ever. "Cold as stable," she said. He huffed the ghost of a laugh. "Missed your brand of stable." Then he was gone. Blackwood barked at an ensign for sloppy perimeter sweeps. Dresna nearly tore her shoulder in the obstacle course, trying to prove something no one was asking her to prove. Rhodes worked like a man on fire, sweat soaking his collar. No jokes now, no easy arrogance, just a quiet desperation to outrun the shadow of what he'd been. Westlake caught Zephyr watching him. "He's trying." "Trying is irrelevant," she said. "Either the breach closes or it doesn't." Spoken like someone who's never had to rebuild. Her eyes flicked to him. "I rebuilt, I just didn't leave the cracks." Westlake said nothing, but his gaze lingered thoughtful. By late afternoon, the drills broke. Officers staggered away to showers and late meals. Zephyr stayed at the gate as the yard emptied, her posture unbroken, her mind still cataloging angles and distances and escape vectors. The sky burned red as the sun dropped behind the perimeter wall. She realized her shoulders ached only when she tried to roll them. The ache was new. Or maybe she was just noticing it for the first time. Night came again, and with it the thing she hadn't expected. A knock on her door. She froze halfway through unlacing her boots. It was late, too late for protocol. She slid silently to the side of the frame, hand ghosting toward the pistol under her desk. "Then it's Rhodes." Her hand stopped. She opened the door. He stood there awkwardly, freshly showered, hair damp, fatigue in his eyes. He looked smaller, like something essential had been stripped away. "I needed to say it where no one else could hear," he said, "so you'd know I meant it." "You already apologized," she said. "This isn't an apology, it's a question." She said nothing. "Why didn't you say who you were?" Her silence stretched so long he shifted on his feet, but she finally spoke, voice quiet even. "Because the point was to see how you behaved when you thought I didn't matter." He flinched, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "And what did you see?" "That security is never about fences," she said. "It's about people, and people fail when arrogance teaches them they're safe." Rhodes looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not giving up on this place." She didn't answer, didn't need to. He left without another word. She stood alone in the quiet after he'd gone, staring at the door. They thought the hard part of her work was the silence. They were wrong. The hard part was letting them see themselves in the mirror she held up, and staying long enough to watch their shame harden into something useful. Staying long enough to see if they could change. And if they could, remembering how to walk away. Why did leaving feel heavier than staying? Zephyr stood at the gate at dawn, as she had every day since arriving, but the air was different now. Not hostile, not dismissive. Wary, careful. The soldiers passing through gave crisp salutes. No muttered jokes, no exaggerated yawns or theatrical smirks. Their eyes flicked to her, then away again, as if prolonged contact might scorch them. Respect wasn't the word, not yet. It was something more fragile than that, like brittle glass trying to harden into steel. Captain Rodas approached mid-morning, posture straight, boots polished, fatigue lines carved around his eyes. He didn't say a word this time, just offered his ID, voice even. "Morning, Lieutenant." "Morning, Captain." Their hands didn't brush, but the air between them felt steadier. She logged him through without another word. He didn't look back as he walked away. Inside the yard, the base was reshaping itself with almost frantic precision. Barracks inspections doubled, comms protocols rewritten, access points fortified. Westlake's team stalked through the compound like wolves through a sheep pen, eyes everywhere, hands silent and sure. The transformation was visible in everything. The tempo of boots on gravel, the clipped cadence of orders, the way conversations cut off when Zephyr passed. No one wanted to be caught slipping, not anymore. And yet the fear had softened just slightly. Like they were beginning to understand this wasn't punishment. It was repair. She watched as Dresna barked instructions at a group of new rangers, sweat streaking her temple. Gone was the mocking smile, the casual cruelty. Her voice trembled on the edges of urgency, of wanting to get this right. Rhodes was worse, working himself raw. He spent hours packing the perimeter, eyes burning with the need to erase who he'd been, as if perfection could bleach shame. Zephyr said nothing. She just kept scanning IDs, logging names, watching the pattern of people shift like the tide. Beneath her silence, something she couldn't name stirred. Something she hadn't felt in years. Almost hope. That afternoon, Westlake found her at her post. He didn't speak right away, just stood beside her in the shadow of the booth, eyes sweeping the horizon like habit had carved it into his bones. "You could have told them who you were," he said finally. "That would have compromised the mission. It would have made it easier." Easier was irrelevant. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "It wouldn't have made you less invisible." Her jaw tightened just slightly. Invisibility was the point. He looked at her, really looked. "That wasn't what I meant." For a second, the noise of the bass seemed to recede, like the world itself was holding its breath. "Do you know what we called you after Nightshade?" he asked. She kept her gaze forward. "A liability." "No," he said, "a ghost." Her breath caught just barely. "Not because you disappeared," he said, "because you stayed." Silence wrapped around them like gauze. Then Westlake's comm clicked. He straightened. "Briefing room, 15 minutes." She gave a crisp nod, understood. He walked away. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she watched him go. The briefing was a machine of precision. Blackwood laid out updated security measures, while Kovach projected revised guard rotation schedules on the wall. Every officer sat straighter than she'd ever seen, spines aligned like rifle barrels. Zephyr stood at the edge of the room, silent, hands clasped behind her back. But she saw it. The cracks beginning to close. When the meeting ended, Blackwood stopped her on the way out. "Lieutenant, Colonel, I want to thank you, personally. Your assessment was difficult to hear, but it's making us better, already." "That was the objective, sir." His mouth twitched like he almost smiled. Then he sobered. If I may ask, will you be conducting similar evaluations elsewhere? She considered him for a long moment. Security protocols are only as strong as the people implementing them, Colonel, she said. Remember that, and you won't need another visit from someone like me. He nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. Safe travels, Lieutenant. That night the base was restless. Not chaotic anymore, just restless, like a muscle twitching as it heals. Zephyr sat at her desk, boots off, writing her final assessment report in her cipher. The words lined up in their perfect rows, precise and unyielding. Her pen stilled. She turned the photograph over. The team stared back, shadowed faces, grins cracked with exhaustion. The weight of the memory pressed down like a familiar stone on her chest. For so long, she had carried the image like a shield, proof she had once belonged to something bigger than herself. But tonight, it felt heavier than it ever had. Because she knew now what they never would. That survival wasn't winning. It was just enduring long enough to finish the job. She slid the photo back into the journal and locked it away. When she looked up, the room felt cavernous, like a place already preparing to forget her. Morning came sharp and cold. The helicopter that would carry her out of Arcturus was scheduled for 48 hours from now. Westlake was waiting outside her door when she stepped out. "Report finalized?" he asked. "Yes." He studied her face. "You don't look relieved." "Relief is not a metric." "Maybe it should be." They walked the perimeter together in silence. Westlake's hands folded behind him, her stride measured and precise beside him. "You know," he said quietly, "you could come back." She didn't answer. "The team's missed you. Even Kovac, though he'll die before he admits it." Still, she said nothing. "You don't have to keep doing this alone." She stopped walking. The silence stretched, taut and brittle. Finally she said, "Alone is efficient." Westlake looked at her, really looked. "So is dead." Her throat tightened. She turned away first. "Orders haven't been issued yet," she said, voice steady. "If they come, I'll follow them." "Always the soldier," he murmured. "Always," she said. They finished the circuit without another word. By late afternoon, word had spread. Lieutenant Callaway would be departing within 2 days. Something unspoken shifted in the air. Not relief, not grief, something else, like the whole base holding its breath, unsure what to do without the shadow she had cast across them. They didn't salute her like a superior. They saluted her like a mirror they hoped might see something salvageable in them. She returned each salute perfectly, her expression a mask. Inside, the ache gnawed quietly. This was the part they'd never understand, the part where you left before anyone could realize how much you had wanted to stay. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling. The bunk felt harder, the room colder. Sleep didn't come. The mission was done, the base was healing, the cracks were closing. So why did it feel like something in her had come unstitched? Maybe it wasn't the leaving that hurt. Maybe it was the knowing they would remember her only as the ghost who haunted them long enough to make them better. Why did departure feel like failure? The sky was still black when Zephyr walked the perimeter for the last time. The air bit cold at her face, and the gravel crunched like breaking bones under her boots. The base slept behind her, still and subdued, like it was holding itself perfectly still in hopes she wouldn't notice its breath. She had walked this same circuit every morning for 3 weeks. But this time, each fence post and sensor beam felt like a goodbye she wasn't supposed to feel. Her orders had come down the night before. Extraction at 600. No ceremony, no send-off, no acknowledgement beyond what was required by protocol. Exactly the way she wanted it. Or the way she had told herself she wanted it. She paused at the northwest blind spot, the one they'd left exposed for 2 full weeks. Now it bristled with fresh motion sensors and overlapping camera arcs, every inch reinforced like they were trying to erase the memory of having ever failed. She stood there longer than she meant to. Then she turned and walked back to the gate. The base was stirring when she returned. Barracks doors slamming, radios crackling, boots hitting gravel in sharp synchronized rhythm. The fear that had once buzzed under every glance had quieted now, replaced by something steadier, like tension forged into discipline. They were different, and she was about to leave them. Captain Rodas approached mid-muster, posture sharp, jaw set. No smile, no trace of the arrogance that had once hung off him like a medal he hadn't earned. "Lieutenant," he said, voice even, "transport confirmed." "Confirmed." He nodded once, the silence stretched. Then he said, "We won't waste what you did here." "That is good to hear." "Not good," he said quietly, "necessary." For a moment their eyes held. There was no shame there now, no defiance. Just resolve. Then he gave a crisp salute. She returned it. He walked away. This time she almost wished he hadn't. By noon, her quarters were stripped bare. Her journal locked into its case, her boots cleaned and laced, her kit sealed and labeled. The photograph lay face down inside the journal, hidden from eyes that didn't know the cost of the smile in it. She looked around one last time. The room looked the way she had found it, sterile, empty, untouched. Like she had never been there at all. Maybe that was fitting. Ghosts weren't supposed to leave footprints. At 1400, Westlake found her at the gate. "You're packed," he said. "Yes." He leaned on the post beside her, eyes on the distant perimeter wall. His stillness carried the weight of storms chained in iron. "You've done what you came to do," he said. "More, probably." "That remains to be seen." "It's already seen," he said quietly. "They're different." She didn't answer. "You changed this place." "They changed themselves," she said. "I just handed them the mirror." He studied her face like it was a map he didn't want to misread. "Come back to the unit," he said softly. "We need you." Her throat tightened. She kept her eyes forward. "You don't need me," she said. "You just miss me." "Sometimes," he said, "that's the same thing." She almost smiled. Almost. Dusk came slow and heavy. The helicopter was scheduled for first light. Extraction would be quiet, low-profile, routine. No one had been told to gather. That was how she wanted it, clean, controlled, forgotten as soon as she left the perimeter. So she was unprepared when she stepped out of her quarters after midnight and found them waiting. Half the base stood in the yard. No formation, no orders, just scattered clusters of silhouettes under the cold floodlights, silent as stone. Her boots stopped on the threshold. No one spoke. No one saluted. They just stood there, eyes fixed on her, like the act of looking was all they had permission to give. Even Dresna was there, shoulders squared, eyes stripped of defiance. Rhoda stood beside her, posture locked like he was holding himself together through sheer will. And behind them, Westlake. Still, watchful, unreadable. Zephyr stepped down into the yard. The silence followed her like a tide. She walked to the center of the open space and stopped. The floodlights painted her in harsh white, a figure cut from shadow and resolve. She looked at them, each face, one by one. Then she said, "Do not mistake fear for discipline. Fear fades, discipline remains." Her voice was calm, flat, but it carried. "If you forget what happened here," she went on, "if you let arrogance bleed back into your routines, if you let yourselves believe you are safe because you wear the uniform, then all of this was nothing." No one moved, no one breathed. "You are only as strong," she said softly, "as the person you are willing to overlook." Her words hung there, cold and sharp and final. Then she saluted them. "Crisp, perfect," and turned away. No one followed her back to her quarters. No one had to. The helicopter came at dawn. The rotor wash tore the morning silence apart as the black shape swept down out of the clouds. She stood at the edge of the landing pad, kit slung over her shoulder, boots braced against the blast. Her hair whipped across her face, but her posture didn't waver. Westlake was the only one waiting. He stood just beyond the rotor spray, hands clasped behind him, eyes on her like he was trying to memorize something he knew he would never see again. She walked to him. "Lieutenant," he said. "Commander." He held her gaze. "Still time to change your mind." She shook her head once. "Then go," he said softly, "before anyone figures out how much they're going to miss you." For a second, something in her chest cracked. She ignored it. She saluted him. He returned it. And that was all. She turned, climbed into the helicopter, and didn't look back. As the bird rose, the base shrank beneath her. The fences and barracks and watchtowers folded into geometry, stripped of all the noise and failure and fragile redemption she had left behind. She sat rigid, hands locked on her knees, eyes on the horizon. She told herself she felt nothing. But as the base disappeared behind the curve of the earth, the lie burned like shrapnel under her ribs. Why did silence feel louder than war? The helicopter set her down at an unmarked airstrip carved into the edge of nowhere. No insignia, no reception, just a lone refueling truck and the empty roar of wind rolling over miles of dead salt flats. The pilot never spoke. She didn't either. An unmarked SUV was waiting at the far end of the strip, engine running. She climbed in without breaking stride. The driver nodded once and pulled away, tires crunching on gravel. They drove for 4 hours through barren country. No cities, no billboards, just long straight roads unraveling under a sky too big to look at for long. When they finally stopped, it was in front of a nondescript concrete block building crouched alone in the desert. The kind of place that didn't exist on any map and didn't want to. Her name wasn't on the clipboard the guard held out, just a number. It was enough. Her assigned quarters were small, windowless, and too clean. No echoes, no scuff marks, no ghosts. The bed was made with sharp military corners. The air smelled of disinfectant and nothing else. The hum of distant HVAC filled the silence like a low-grade threat. Zephyr stood in the middle of the room with her duffel at her feet and realized she didn't know what to do with her hands. For weeks she had lived in perpetual motion, watching, cataloging, measuring every flaw like pressure points on a fragile body. Now there was nothing to measure. No breaches to close. No fences to walk. No noise to cut through with precision. Just stillness. It felt heavier than the gate ever had. She unpacked with mechanical precision. Boots lined against the wall, journal locked into the drawer, photo faced on beneath it, weapons stripped, cleaned, reassembled, stored. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and waited for something to happen. Nothing did. Hours passed. The light didn't change. There was no window to let it. Her hands itched with unused adrenaline. Her heart kept bracing for impacts that never came. Her mind reached for patterns to track, weaknesses to shore up, but found only blankness. This was the part no one trained you for. When the fight was over, and no one needed you to keep breathing. Days blurred. She rose at 500 out of habit, ran until her lungs burned, drilled until her muscles trembled. She filed her report, triple encrypted, submitted it to the invisible chain of command that had placed her at Arcturus. No reply came. There never would be. After that, time lost its edges. Meals she barely tasted. Showers she barely felt. Nights spent staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed the sound of the rotor fatting as the base fell away beneath her. It looped like a song she didn't like but couldn't stop hearing. She had left as cleanly as she always did. No attachments. No fractures. So why did it feel like something had been cut out of her? On the fourth day, she opened her journal. Not the ciphered entries, those belonged to the mission. This time she wrote in plain language. It felt wrong at first, exposed, dangerous. But the words came. They think the work is the silence. It is. The work is staying silent long enough for them to hear themselves. The work is letting them hate you until they realize you were never the enemy. The work is walking away before they understand what you cost yourself to stay. Her pen stilled. She stared at the words until they blurred. Then she closed the journal and locked it again. That night, a message blinked on her secure terminal. No active deployment, standby status, location classified. She read it 3 times. The words didn't change. Standby. Not dismissed. Not retired. Just waiting. Invisible by design. Her pulse slowed, but the pressure in her chest didn't ease. The next morning, she drove to the edge of the desert compound. There was a fence there, high, razor-wired, sensor-lined. Beyond it, nothing but horizon. She stood with her hands hooked into the chain link, the sun burning her face, the wind snapping her hair like a flag. There were no soldiers here, no drills, no salutes. Just silence. And yet she could still feel the rhythm of Arcturus under her skin, the crunch of boots, the crack of orders, the way they had all looked at her at the end like they wanted her to see something salvageable in them. And for a moment, she wondered if she had. Her chest ached. It startled her. She had thought she was done feeling things like that. Back in her room, she stripped off her boots and lay down on the floor instead of the bed, staring at the ceiling like it might blink first. She tried to remember the sound of her own laugh. She couldn't. It had been trained out of her long before Nightshade, long before the gate. On the 6th day, she woke before dawn to the soft chime of her secure terminal. Message command review complete, new orders pending. Her breath caught. For the first time in a week, something like a pulse stirred under her ribs. Pending. Not forgotten. Not discarded. Pending. She read it again, then again, until the edges of the words blurred. Then she closed the terminal and sat very still in the dim light, hands folded in her lap, heart steadying like a sniper's scope. She didn't know what the new orders would be, where they would send her, who she would have to become this time. She only knew one thing. The silence was almost over, and she wasn't sure if that was relief or grief. Why did it feel like coming back to life might kill her? The new orders came at 400. No preamble, no context, just a coordinate string, a time, and a single word. Redeploy. She stared at the screen in the cold light of her quarters. Then she closed the terminal and rose. Her hands moved automatically, packing gear, stripping her cot, lacing boots with mechanical precision. Every motion smooth, silent, seamless. But her pulse thudded like distant artillery under her ribs. It wasn't fear. Not quite. Just the strange vertigo of being asked to become someone again. She caught her reflection in the metal wall as she swung her duffel over her shoulder. For 3 weeks at Arcturus, they had looked through her. Then they had looked at her. Now soon, someone else would look and see nothing again. That was the point. But for the first time, she wasn't sure she could vanish cleanly. The transport plane waited at the desert strip like a patient animal. Its engines muttered softly in the pre-dawn chill. The air tasted like metal and rain that would never fall. Zephyr climbed the ramp without looking back. The bay lights washed everything in sterile white. She strapped in alone. No words. No briefing. No team. just the endless hum of machinery carrying her away from the stillness she had nearly drowned in. As the wheels left the ground, the compound shrank beneath her until it became what it had always been. A place that never meant to keep her. Hours blurred. Clouds swallowed the sun. Her world narrowed to the rattle of the fuselage and the slow, steady breath she forced herself to take. She tried to picture where she was going, what waited at the coordinates. Nothing came. That was how they designed these missions. No faces, no stakes, no attachments. Just the work. Just her. And yet, between heartbeats, she saw the gate at Arcturus again. The gravel, the watchtower, the way Rhodus had stood a little taller when he thought she wasn't watching. The way they had all looked at her that last night, silent under the floodlights, like they wanted her to see they could be better. And the worst part was she had. The plane touched down in a storm. Sheets of rain hammered the tarmac, hissing off the fuselage. The wind screamed like a warning. She disembarked into chaos, ground crews running bent back through the downpour, shouting over the thunder. A blacked-out SUV skidded to a halt in front of her. The rear door opened. Commander Westlake sat inside. He looked exactly as he had the day he saluted her, sharp, composed, eyes like loaded chambers. "Get in," he said. She did. The door shut. The storm vanished behind soundproof glass. For a long moment, they just watched each other. "Didn't expect you," she said quietly. "Didn't expect to be here," he replied. "Command wants you attached to my unit again. Full reinstatement. Operational clearance already processed." Her fingers tightened on the duffel in her lap. "When?" "Now." Silence stretched, taut as wire. The hum of tires on wet asphalt filled it. "You could have said no," she murmured. "I could have," he said, "didn't." Her throat ached. She made sure it didn't show. "Is this permanent?" Westlake almost smiled. "Not warmth, recognition. Nothing about you ever is." They drove through the storm until the airstrip vanished behind curtains of water. He briefed her in clipped sentences as the miles unraveled beneath them. Objectives, logistics, threat profiles. She listened, silent, every word slotting into place in her mind like ammunition into a magazine. She felt herself changing with each mile, layer by layer. Dismantling the part that had sat staring at ceilings in the desert. Reassembling the part built for movement, for silence, for staying until the job was done. By the time the SUV rolled through the checkpoint gates of a forward base whose name they didn't say out loud, she was no longer carrying her duffel. She was wearing it. They passed the outer wire as the rain thinned to mist. Soldiers watched them from the shadows of the guard towers, rifles at low ready. Their eyes tracked her, assessing, curious, dismissive. She recognized it. The same look they'd given her at Arcturus. The corner of her mouth almost twitched. Westlake caught it, said nothing. The SUV stopped at the center of the compound. "Command post is this way," he said. "You'll get your quarters assignment after initial recon." She nodded once, then stepped out into the yard. The mud sucked at her boots. The wind stung her face. The compound loomed around her, faceless and unfamiliar. And it felt like home. Hours later, she stood her first watch. Different gate, different uniforms, same smell of oil and rain and human exhaustion. Same way they barely looked at her. She scanned IDs, logged names, watched movement patterns, calculated angles and escape vectors out of habit as the sky bruised toward night. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. The work had begun. And for the first time since she'd left Arcturus, the silence inside her didn't feel hollow. It felt like purpose. As the last convoy cleared through and the yard emptied into shadow, she stood alone in the beam of the floodlight. Rain dripped off her cap. Her uniform clung cold to her shoulders. Her boots rooted her to the earth like anchors. She looked at the dark road stretching beyond the perimeter. She thought of the 11 names carved into the inside of her memory, of Rhodes's awkward apology, of the way Arcturus had learned, slowly and painfully, to stand taller. She would leave this place one day too, quietly, without ceremony, as a ghost. But maybe, if she did her work well enough, they would remember how it felt to be seen. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply stands and waits until someone finally understands what it costs to be invisible.